Hello and welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Professor Ryan Bollock. He's at the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke, where he's an adjunct assistant professor in the engineering graduate and professional programs and a lecturing fellow in the Fuqua School of Business. Ryan, hello.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
No, thank you so much for joining. And it's really, really great that you are able to be with us here today. I wonder, Ryan, what brings you to this conversation around AI, please?
Yeah, so I've spent a really long time working in AI, both as my job as well as a passion. Way back in the days before GPT was a household name, you and I have had some great discussions about AI and modern education, and there was a lot of overlap there. And I think that your podcast is a great opportunity to further that shared mission and kind of keep these conversations going in a way that we can all be a part of. My current work at Duke University is a lot around helping the university as a whole build on our AI policies and make sure that we are approaching this new technology in a really responsible way. So I think that your platform is really a good space to talk about those issues. And then just this broader mission around ensuring that we have responsible conversations around AI and spread this word around how can we use these tools in a way that furthers what we do and not make it a battleground.
That sounds great. And I think we've had some incredible conversations previously. And we've spoken about something that you are a founder of called Byline. And Byline, for those of you who haven't come across it before, is a writing transparency tool that tracks AI and human authorship in real time as you write. And I wonder, Ryan, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of where the idea for Byline came from your point of view.
Yeah, definitely. So it really started with talking to people, students at mostly at Duke, as well as some people that I know at other universities, and then talking to faculty and hearing the same story from a different perspective. From the student's perspective, it's, hey, I'm writing these assignments and I'm trying to do good, honest work and meet the policies that are at my university. Um, but my work keeps getting flagged. Why is that? And on the professor's side, it's I have these policies and I want to be able to have this open environment and classroom, but the only way that I have to really enforce these policies is a set of online tools that is not necessarily accurate. And that leads to a narrative that for the student that is not necessarily how that document came together. So what am I talking about? Students are writing assignments and we want to know, maybe as faculty, how much of that was written by AI. And there are online detectors out there that falsely attribute these things because the models guess. So I thought that I could build a tool that, with certainty, without guessing, credits authors with what they wrote and tells you how a document came together. So that was really where it started. And then as I've been building this, I just want also a good writing tool for myself. I've included a lot of things that I've seen missing from different tools out there and combined some features that I've really liked into just a good writing tool with AI built in that also has authorship and transparency built in.
And yeah, it's really interesting that you use that word transparency. And I wonder, thinking about this tool, could you walk us through what transparency perhaps looks like in practice when someone's using Byline?
Yeah. So the great thing is that the user doesn't have to you don't have to do anything when you're writing in Byline. You simply write as you normally would. So one of the challenges that I've seen with academic writing is that there's a request from a professor to say, yeah, sure, use AI however much you'd like, but just cite it. And even that small amount of friction, there's a really interesting study done by Carradine at Duke that talks about this. Even though it's very well known by a lot of classes that you can use these tools, nobody really wants to cite it. And a lot of that is due to simply the friction that's involved of, where do I draw that line? And the great thing about Byline is that it's all automatic. If you use AI, which is directly native inside of it, it just automatically shares that, hey, you used AI here, but it does it in a way that is transparent. So let's say, for example, you use it for translation if English isn't your first language. It will say that, or whatever language you're going to and from, it will show that you used AI to translate this, but it will show what the original bit of text that you wrote in your own language, so that it has this kind of provenance of your original writing as well. And it can also show that, hey, you used AI to improve your writing, and it was just a part of that story. It wasn't necessarily the whole story. So there's a lot of different avenues into this, and it basically just shows everything as a report. And you can digest that report and use it really however you would like.
And I think from my experience of using the tool, when we spoke for the first time, you kind of gave me a demo and we went through it, and we spoke a lot about how it could be applied in my classroom. And obviously you said how it's been used in others. And I was astounded by what it could do, and the simplicity with which it did it. You spoke about the friction that exists sometimes between professors and their students when it comes to kind of citing these tools. Have you had any feedback from either educators or students that this has helped with that, or like what's been the general sense that you've got?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. You don't always get that when you release a product. So first, that's been really encouraging. What students have been saying is that it's really nice to have everything in one place. So you're not jumping around from tool to tool. I write something in ChatGPT and then I need to go over to Claude and then I need, maybe I'm back to Gemini for something. It's all just in one place. And even if I write a document in ChatGPT, I need to put it somewhere. So basically, you can still use these tools, but it's all in one place. So from a start, that's been really positive from students' perspective. And what I've heard is that they interact with AI in a slightly different way in this tool. It's not necessary. I don't have a chat interface built in. Part of that's on purpose to encourage us to use the really unique, amazing parts of our own brains and essentially pair right with an AI tool. And this leads to a slightly different interaction, but it's students have said that they feel like their writing's already improved even, and they feel like they can express their ideas a little bit better than per se just going through a chat log on ChatGPT, which has been really surprising to me, but I'm really excited to hear it. And it's something that I want to continue to dive into to see if, we can support that even more.
Yeah, and it sounds like great feedback to get. And I think one of the things that I know I was interested in when we spoke was how can I use it in the different disciplines that I teach in? Because I'm based in chemistry, but I'm a historian and I work on innovation. And so is this a tool that can be translated? And I mentioned up top as well, obviously, your experience in business school, but also in engineering. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on how has that interdisciplinary thinking shaped your approach to AI in education, and perhaps the development of Byline as well?
Yeah, my background is, for those of you that don't know, I have an undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering and I have an advanced degree, master's in industrial design, and I've worked in a few different areas and everything from medical devices to designing digital products for Fortune 500 companies as well as building startups around AI, different applications of it. And I think everything from medical devices to user experience design really goes into everything that I do. I come at the problems that I'm trying to solve from a first principles approach, both in engineering and design. And what does that mean in practice? It means that I am constantly trying to solve a problem. It's all back to what ways can I help make somebody's life better? As cliche as that sounds, it really has inspired a lot of why Byline started and how it was built. My own sister-in-law, her first paper in undergrad, she was so excited. She unfortunately received a zero for it because the claim was that she wrote the whole paper with AI, just copied and pasted according to these online detectors. And she actually didn't use AI at all. Unfortunately, a lot of these detectors actually they can be a little harsher, so to speak. They might say more AI was written depending on your writing style. For example, I didn't use the M dash, but I would use just a regular dash before generative AI text was becoming the norm. And I've found that I use it a lot less. And it's kind of sad because it's taken away a bit of how I personally wrote. Byline helps me personally actually introduce that back in because you can see that, hey, I did write that even though there's a dash. And with my sister in law, it's, hey, can I give you a tool that allows you to write this really awesome writing that you're doing for these various classes without worrying about getting into an academic integrity cycle when no one really needs to be in it? So I think just having a lot of different experiences has made this story of Byline really interesting to start. And then the last thing I'll add is that because I've been involved in many different uses of technology, my first instinct is not to just use the shiny new thing of saying, hey, let's use these interesting LLMs and AI models, which I think are great, and I integrate them into the tool. Let's not use that to detect writing, though, because I've taken a lot of time to understand how these models work. And there are some unfortunate flaws in that way of thinking. So if you go back and actually think a little bit simpler in terms of your approach, even though the actual way to integrate it is difficult and takes time and involves building a platform like Byline, some of the principles in there are extremely predictable, software engineering based, and by reining it in, so to speak, it's allowed me to build a more accurate tool.
And I love hearing about how you, thinking about your interdisciplinary experiences and perspectives, that you alluded to this idea of design and kind of human-centered design when you were thinking about this tool. And that is something that in my work I do as well, is trying to think, okay, but how can I solve this for the user rather than solve it for me? And I think what you're describing with some of these AI tools where they're incorrect, and I know that my colleagues and I, we do talk about how can we begin to use more tools to help check students' writing, for want of a better term, to see if it's AI generated. But the way that you describe Byline gives me that confidence, I think, with it, that it's something that has come from a place of someone in education as a starting point, which is really, really crucial. Someone who has an understanding of the engineering side of it, as you said, but also the design side and that human centered part. And I was going to ask you, I think the story of your sister-in-law is really interesting. And I was going to ask you a bit more about what Byline does differently from other AI tools, but I think you've probably covered some of that. So I wonder, instead, could you talk a little bit more about how Byline handles perhaps collaborative writing or iterative editing? Is it possible to use this for, say, group work or something similar?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because collaboration was built from the ground up at the start as part of this platform. Nothing in academia or really writing in general is going to be uh, as successful without collaboration as with it because we live in a collaborative world. And one of the really interesting things that I built into Byline that I haven't seen before, and this just comes from, I feel really lucky to be a professor and be really close to these things that I'm hearing and also be able to beta test with some of my students. It's actually been really interesting because I teach a design and engineering course and we actually go through, hey, here's a real example of this happening in real time. So one of those things that came up from an interesting conversation with my students is, well, I'm doing group work and hey, I wrote most of this, can we have a conversation about that? Or, we all really contributed equally and I want to celebrate my team. Like, how do you actually know that? So Byline actually will show it. First of all, it's collaborative by nature. So you can drop into a document just like any other documentation platform, Google Docs, Notion, Microsoft Word, and you will see somebody's avatar at the top. You will see where their cursor is, just like you're used to, and you can type, to your heart's content and collaborate. Byline is taking that authorship live and saying, I wrote this, maybe Tom, you wrote that. And at the end of it, you can look at the report and actually click on each person's name and it will highlight who wrote what. So you can get this kind of really interesting view on how a document was put together by the different collaborators. And then over time, you can see that as well, because you can go back to the version history and just at a glance see how this changed from maybe most of it was written by AI to help us get an outline. And then as we're writing and collaborating with AI, you're getting more and more just human written text or maybe improved with AI, whatever it might be. You can kind of see how these documents evolve. And I find that it's actually been really cool to see that with my students. Many of them have shared it with me, like their kind of version history. And you can almost fingerprint, how people work with these tools. And I think that it's interesting for me as an educator, but I think that there's even more opportunity on the student side to learn how they use these tools and ultimately, that's going to carry their success, once they're no longer taking my courses. So that's what it's really about, is enabling people to really understand how they work and optimize it so that they can go out and do great things.
And I say, from someone who teaches group work and does group assessments, this sounds like a really good opportunity to have a tool like this to help with those submissions. But I think the final point that you said is what really excited me, this idea of this tool allows us to perhaps even rethink how we're doing the types of assessment. So there are courses I teach where I would be more interested to see the student's journey and those fingerprinting points of how they're using AI than almost the final product. The final product almost doesn't matter depending on the context, but actually it's how are they navigating themselves in a group in relation to AI through the iterative process. That could be a really interesting space to actually assess and consider how people are learning and using and being perhaps more critical in that space. So I really like that there's an opportunity there, that the tool that you've created is not just a means to an end for existing assessments, but actually challenges the pedagogy and the assessment approach that we're perhaps thinking about and is being discussed more widely in higher education around this kind of emergent role of AI.
Yeah, it's totally about the journey, not necessarily the destination, although the destination is interesting.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I can see how this tool would be incredibly useful for specific things, again, that I've taught and that I know colleagues teach, but just so many conversations I'm having at the moment are around how can we use AI to innovate our assessments and give students that critical AI literacy along the way. And I wonder, with that in mind, what opportunities and challenges are you seeing for AI generally, but also these types of AI tools in higher education?
The biggest opportunity is really that there are so many tools and there are so many people in higher education. And how do you try everything? You really can't. It's hard to try every new AI tool that's out there. So for me, there's a really big opportunity in a lot of what I do at Fuqua specifically, but also over in Pratt. Fuqua's business school, Pratt is engineering. A lot of what I do is about just talking about the things that I've used. And then that opens the conversation for other people to talk about what they've used. And so I think that knowing what tools are out there is a huge component because Byline, for example, it has been a grassroots of me just talking about it. Hey, here's an interesting tool that you can add to your toolkit, but it's not necessarily the only answer because I still think ChatGPT is great. And I still think that V0, which is a tool about building applications online with just natural language, I think these all have incredible opportunities. What I think is needed in higher education and really just at large is understanding what these models are capable of and how they're built. Biases and how all of that comes into play is really important, but also what is the technology? How does a transformer model work? You don't necessarily need to be a machine learning engineer to know generally how these systems think. I like to make metaphors to how we think as people. And that's helped a lot of like, oh, okay, here's why maybe I shouldn't use an LLM to see if my student was writing with AI, for example.
And I think it's really interesting you saying about the breadth of these tools and the requirement or the opportunity, perhaps instead, that is offered by being able to share in discussions, as you've said with Byline. But I wonder, because there is such a proliferation of these tools, and at least from my experience, and I don't know what it's like for you at Duke, that sometimes the governance behind setting these AI policies for students is really complicated and becomes difficult to keep up with. And I wonder, what role do you think institutions versus individual educators should play when thinking and setting these AI policies for, let's say, assessment? Because it's a real challenge in terms of it's only in institutions that you can understand perhaps the majority of these tools, because as you say, individual educators may have one or two that they prefer, but it means they might be missing out on an entire area of AI and the AI tools that their students could use.
Yeah, this is really tough. This is where a lot of rubber is meeting the road, in my opinion, where kind of the optimism meets reality, where I might have certain thoughts about use of AI in my classroom, but a colleague might have a different view, right? What I've seen is there's kind of a few broad categories, a couple of them being go for it, use AI. It could be 100% and that's fine. It's about how we get there. And that's great. I support that. But then there's also, I want to have no AI in my classroom. And I also support the levels of thinking there. I think at the course level, the professor will often know what's best for the class. But on the side of it of, I don't want to use AI in the classroom at all, I do often ask about, okay, what are the motivations behind that? And sometimes that leads into, I just want to catch people using AI. I want to catch them, right? And I think that personally, how I try to approach education is less of a cat and mouse game where, we're all trying to get better every day. And if I'm constantly trying to quote unquote catch you using tools that I use, it's a bit of a gray area. At the same time, I think, I guess, to go back to your original question of how do we make this connect between the institution and the individual professors, I think this is hard. I think that you basically need to have committees where professors who are interacting with students every day from different disciplines, because engineering has a different relationship with AI than maybe creative writing. Having these people in the room and saying, okay, what is kind of the average of this? And what's a policy that we can set that doesn't necessarily block people from doing what they need to do, but encourages us to think about it more? So, a policy at an institution might be students need to cite every use of AI. Simple as that. It could just be as simple as that. I actually had somebody use an AI voice tool to transcribe what they were talking about. And that voice tool spits out some text. And they pasted all of that text into Byline. And Byline will show if you paste text in. And I'm looking at this assignment. I'm like, wow, they pasted the whole thing. Like, what's going on here? And down at the bottom, they said, hey, I used this audio tool to transcribe. And that was really interesting. And they shared the tool and we talked about it a little bit. So that was something new to me. And I'm like, oh, hey, maybe I can support that. So I think being open to the fact that this world is changing rapidly and being flexible is kind of the way I think that we can move forward.
And I really like how we've discussed policy there, but I wonder if we could change track slightly and think about actually the students who are using these tools. And so I wonder, what changes have you observed in student writing behaviors when they know that the process is visible, as you've described through Byline? Like, what's happening for students?
I notice less AI use. So it
Which is counterintuitive.
it's counterintuitive. It's really interesting. I stand up in the front of the class and I say, go for it. You can use AI. I've literally built the tool for you to use it. Now, part of this might be due to the nature of the types of assignments I'm asking for. There is a lot of engineering involved, so the writing portion of it is a lot of reflection. So maybe your own voice is more relevant in that example. But I've asked students, kind of why is this? And usually I get the answer of, yeah, the tool helps me have this place to write my ideas. And then oftentimes I just like the way that it sounds. It feels like me. And I don't necessarily need to chase this quote unquote perfect ChatGPT-esque writing. My voice just comes through and I realize, oh, it actually sounds pretty good. So I think some of these tools have actually made us forget that, the personality behind us is really interesting. So it's not to say we shouldn't use AI, built a tool around it, but hey, we have some really good thoughts too. And for me personally, I find that I am using it to help me scaffold more than I'm using it to help me, I guess, like beautify the writing and edit it.
I can really see the use case there, as you say, around scaffolding it and it being a tool that, again, counterintuitively helps you find your own voice. Because I think for me, in the times that I've played with the tool, because it's telling you what's AI, what's you, what you've rewritten, for me, it makes me think about that more. And it makes me think, okay, could I word that better myself? Because I think sometimes with your more traditional GPTs or Claude or whatever, there's a temptation to go, well, it said this, so it must be right. Whereas I love that it pushes you to think a bit more. Again, it pushes you to think more critically and to put a bit more of you into what you're writing. But I wonder, my penultimate question really is how would you respond to critics who might say that transparency tools like this create more anxiety for students than clarity?
Yeah, and I think it's a valid point. When I write a document, I do think about like, yeah, hey, I'm the authorship is right there. So how might I talk to a student who's anxious about it? Well, first, one great thing about the tool is just in the tool itself, you don't have to look at any of that information. So, my general advice is just to use it, just to write, use AI, paste stuff in, build a document as you normally would. And if you go and look at that report and you feel proud of how that came together, then I think that's a great thing. And I think you should feel proud about it because that's how you got to it. If you were happy with the output, then you have every right to feel happy about how we got there. And I think that the nervousness on that is more of a door to talk about it. Whenever I have a student who's not, this specific question hasn't necessarily come up, but if they're nervous about something, or, for me, it's not a time to judge, it's a time to talk. And we are heading into an unprecedented world with the use of generative tools in everything that we build, not just writing. And we're going to have some uncomfortable discussions because of that. And part of it is just embracing that, hey, there might be some discomfort here, but on the other side of it, we might all be happier. We're not all trying to hide behind, hey, I have this perfect version of what ChatGPT said, and we're now all just interacting with our versions of ChatGPT. Maybe we're going back to, a more human discussion. And that can be uncomfortable and hard. So I guess my general thought is to embrace it and see what it's like on the other end.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the way that you've described almost not looking at that report as you're writing is a different way of approaching it than perhaps some of the AI tools that colleagues are using, where it's, as you say, designed to catch rather than designing tools that help educate. I wonder, Ryan, for the last question, and it's one I ask everyone, what steps can we take to build a more positive future with AI, do you think?
Yeah, so I would say that we need to build tools that respect all the users that might use it. There have been some really exciting stories about AI propelling people into places they never thought they could go. I've built a lot of things that I didn't think I could build, just going back and forth and using AI to help me. But there's also been just as many stories of, I'll use a medical device term, an adverse effect using these tools. And I think that because we can build and release both AI tools and tools built with AI, if that makes sense, that might not necessarily have AI built in, because it enables us to essentially push products so much faster. It really, in my opinion, to build a positive future, we need to, before releasing things into the world, really take time to understand what their impact is, because it can be so dramatic, both positively and negatively. And a lot of tools are getting better at this. And this was definitely not something you saw in the beginning, but just transparency. I've talked about it with how Byline works with, an authorship citation essentially. But now many of these chat applications or even these online detectors, now they will say, hey, this is not accurate. The online detector for AI writing, they say, don't use this for anything that could affect somebody's life. So you, as the tool maker, know that. So this is a call out to the tool makers to know the limitations of your tool and be okay with what those are, because it's better to be honest about it than to have, some sort of controversy. So in general, I do think that AI enables a lot of positivity in the world. And I, being an optimist, want to focus on that. And I think that the more we learn and understand how these tools work, the better we can achieve that end. And at the same time, because a lot of the way these tools work, there's some rooting in how our brains work. It can even help us understand a little bit more about ourselves, which at the end of the day, over the last many years of working in AI, that's been the most interesting thing to me. I've learned more about myself and how I think and potentially other people think through learning these things than I have using them. So it's a really interesting opportunity to put a mirror up to ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate the perspective you brought about the tool makers. And I think that's not something that we've spoken about too much previously, where we tend to focus more on specific education policy or the roles of educators. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Ryan, so much for bringing your perspectives from Duke in terms of business and engineering, but also as the founder of Byline. I think it's been really useful to hear the steps you've taken to almost walk the walk with some of this, from the conversations you've had with students and staff, to create something that can help address these challenges and can help the way that we will continue to use AI in future with these types of tools. So thank you so much, Ryan, and really, really great to speak to you. Have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it.